All right, so what follows are the minutes of one of Boswell and Johnson's very first real hangout sessions, or sesh, if you prefer. Madness frequently discovers itself merely by a necessary deviation from the usual modes of the world. My poor friend Smart showed the disturbance of his mind by falling upon his knees and saying his prayers in the street or in any other unusual place. Now, although, rationally speaking, it is greater madness not to pray at all than to pray as Smart did, I am afraid there are as so many who do not pray that their understanding is not called in question. Concerning this unfortunate poet, Christopher Smart, who was confined in a madhouse, he had, at another time, the following conversation with Dr. Burney, in which Burney said, "How does poor Smart do, sir? Is he likely to recover?" And Johnson replied, "It seems as if his mind had ceased to struggle with the disease, for he grows fat upon it." Burney, "Perhaps, sir, there may be from want of exercise." Johnson, "No, sir, he has partly as much exercise as he used to have, for he digs in the garden. Indeed, before his confinement, he used for exercise to walk to the alehouse, but he was carried back again. I did not think he ought to be shut up. His infirmities were not noxious to society. He insisted on people praying with him, and I'd as lief pray with King Kit Smart as anyone else. Another charge was that he did not love clean linen, and I have no passion for it." Johnson continued, "Mankind have a great aversion to intellectual labor, but even supposing knowledge to be easily attainable, more people would be content to be ignorant than would take even a little trouble to acquire it." I can agree with that. Modern times have shown us that, certainly. The morality of an action depends on the motive from which we act. If I fling half a crown to a beggar with intention to break his head, and he picks it up and buys the victuals with it, the physical effect is good. But with respect to me, that action is very wrong. So religious exercises, if not performed with an intention to please God, avail us nothing. As our Savior says of those who perform them from other motives, verily they have their reward. The Christian religion has very strong evidences. It indeed appears in some degree strange to reason, but in history we have undoubted facts against which, reasoning a priori, we have more arguments than we have for them. But then, testimony has great weight and casts the balance. I would recommend to every man whose forth is yet unsettled Grotius, Dr. Pearson, and Dr. Clark. Talking of Garrick, Johnson said, "He is the first man in the world for a sprightly conversation." When I rose a second time, he again pressed me to stay, which I did. This is Boswell. He told me that he generally went abroad at 4 in the afternoon and seldom came home till 2 in the morning. Night owl, Johnson is. I took the liberty to ask if he did not think it wrong to live thus and not make more use of his great talents. He owned it was a bad habit. On reviewing, at the distance of many years, my journal of this period, I wonder how, at my first visit, I ventured to talk to him so freely, and that he bore it with so much indulgence. Before we parted, he was so good as to promise to favor me with his company one evening at my lodgings, and as I took my leave, shook me cordially by the hand. It is almost needless to add that I felt so little elation at having now so happily established an acquaintance of which I had been so long ambitious. So he didn't. It is almost needless to add that I felt no little elate. Oh, no little, so he did feel. Sorry, I forget how passive-aggressive they read back then. at having now so happily established an acquaintance of which I had been so long ambitious. My readers will, I trust, excuse me for being thus minutely circumstantial when it is considered that the acquaintance of Dr. Johnson was to me a most valuable acquisition, and laid the foundation of whatever instruction and entertainment they may receive from my collections concerning the great subject of the work which they are now perusing. I did not visit him again till Monday, June 13th, at which time I recollect no part of his conversation, except that when I told him I had been to see Johnson ride upon 3 horses, he said, "Such a man, sir, should be encouraged." I guess this is a different Johnson. "For his performances show the extent of the human powers in one instance, and thus tend to raise our opinion of the faculties of man. He shows what may be attained by persevering application, so that every man may hope that by giving so much application, although perhaps he may never ride 3 horses at a time, or dance upon a wire, yet he may be equally expert in whatever profession he has chosen to pursue." Johnson's a little pompous, yeah. He again shook me by the hand at parting, and asked me why I did not come oftener to see him. Trusting that I was now in his good graces, I answered that he had not given me much encouragement, and reminded him of the check I had received from him at our first interview. "Poe," said he, with a complacent smile, "never mind these things. Come to me as often as you can. I shall be glad to see you." I had learned that his place of frequent resort was the Mitra Tavern on Fleet Street, where he loved to sit up late, and I begged I might be allowed to pass an evening with him there soon, which he promised I should. A few days afterwards I met him near Temple Bar, about 1 o'clock in the morning, and asked if he would then go to the Mitre, M-I-T-R-E. "Sir," said he, "it is too late. They won't let us in. But I'll go with you another night with all my heart." A revolution of some importance in my plan of life had just taken place, for instead of procuring a commission in the Foot Guards, which was my own inclination, I had, in compliance with my father's wishes, agreed to study the law, and was soon to set out for Utrecht, to hear the lectures of an excellent civilian in the university, and then to proceed on my travels. Though very desirous of obtaining Dr. Johnson's advice and instructions on the mode of pursuing my studies, I was at this time so occupied, shall I call it, or so dissipated by the amusements of London, that our next meeting was not till Saturday, June 25th, when, happening to dine at Clifton's eating house in Butcher Row, I was surprised to perceive Johnson come in and take his seat at another table. The mode of dining, or rather being fed, at such houses in London is well known to many to be particularly unsocial, as there is no ordinary or united company, but each person has his own mess, and is under no obligation to hold any intercourse with anyone. A liberal and full-minded man, however, who loves to talk, will break through this churlish and unsocial restraint. Johnson and an Irish gentleman got into a dispute concerning the cause of some part of mankind being black. "Why, sir," said Johnson, "it has been accounted for in 3 ways, either by supposing that they are the posterity of Ham, who was cursed, or that God at first created 2 kinds of men, one black and another white, or that by the heat of the sun the skin is scorched and so acquires a sooty hue." Probably the more likely, I guess. This matter has been much canvassed among naturalists, but has never been brought to any certain issue. What the Irishman said is totally obliterated from my mind, but I remember that he became very warm and intemperate in his own expressions, upon which Johnson rose and quietly walked away. When he had retired, his antagonist took his revenge, as he thought, by saying, He has a most ungainly figure and an affectation of pomposity unworthy of a man of genius. Johnson had not observed that I was in the room. I followed him, however, and he agreed to meet me in the evening at the Maitre. I called on him, and we went thither at 9. We had a good supper and port of wine, of which he then sometimes drank a bottle. The orthodox high church sound of the Maitre, the figure and manner of the celebrated Samuel Johnson, the extraordinary power and precision of his conversation, and the pride arising from finding myself admitted as his companion, produced a variety of sensations and a pleasing elevation of mind beyond what I had ever before experienced. I find in my journal the following minute of our conversation, which, though it will give but a very faint notion of what passed, is in some degree a valuable record, and it will be curious in this view, as showing how habitual to his mind were some opinions which appear in his works. Quoting Johnson here. Collie Kibber, sir, was by no means a blockhead, but by arrogating to himself too much, he was in danger of losing that degree of estimation to which he was entitled. His friends gave out that he intended his birthday odes should be bad, but that was not the case, sir, for he kept them many months by him, and a few years before he died he showed me one of them with great solicitude to render it as perfect as might be, and I made some corrections, to which he was not very willing to submit. I remember the following couplet in allusion to the king and himself. Perched on the eagle's soaring wing, the lowly linnet loves to sing. Sir, he had heard something of the fabulous tale of the wren sitting upon the eagle's wing, and he had applied it to a linnet. Cibber's familiar style, however, was better than that which Whitehead has assumed. Grand nonsense is insupportable. Whitehead is but a little man to inscribe verses to players. Boswell here. I did not presume to controvert this censure, which was tinctured with his prejudice against players. But I could not help thinking that a dramatic poet might, with propriety, pay a compliment to an eminent performer, as Whitehead had been happily done in his verse to Mr. Garrick. Sir, I do not think Gray a first-rate poet. He has not a bold imagination, nor much command of words. The obscurity in which he has involved himself will not persuade us that he is sublime. His elegy in a churchyard has a happy selection of images, but I don't like what are called his great things. His ode, which begins, Ruin seize thee, ruthless king, confusion on thy banners wait, has been celebrated for its abruptness and plunging into the subject all at once. But such arts as these have no merit unless when they are original. We admire them only once, and this abruptness has nothing new in it. We have had it often before. Nay, we have had it in the old song of Johnny Armstrong. Is there ever a man in all Scotland, from the highest estate to the lowest degrees, and etc.? And then, sir, yes, there is a man in Westmoreland, and Johnny Armstrong they do him call. There now you plunge at once into the subject. You have no previous narration to lead you on to it. The two next lines in that ode are, I think, very good. Though fanned by conquest's crimson wing, they mock the air with idle state. Footnote here from Boswell. My friend Mr. Malone, in his valuable comments on Shakespeare, has traced in that great poet the dejecta mentua of these lines. See page 78. I shall return to page 78 right now. Ba-ba-ba-ba. That was a while ago. I believe it's this idle state. Let's see. I don't see anything on page 78. Ejecta membra. Oh, wait, here it is. He's talking about something else here. The whole of it is rich in thought and imagery and happy expresses and of the dejecta membra. And then there's a translation, dismembered limbs, from Horace. So that's what dejecta membra means, dismembered limbs. That was quite an aside. I lost my train of thought here. Okay, so Johnson was quoting the next line of this Johnny Armstrong poem, I believe, or maybe it's the Gray's poem. Here let it be observed that although his opinion of Gray's poetry was... Oh, this is Boswell again. Here let it be observed that although his opinion of Gray's poetry was widely different from mine, and I believe from that of most men of taste, by whom it is with justice highly admired, there is certainly some absurdity in the clamor which has been raised, as it has been culpably injurious to the merit of that bard, and has been actuated by envy. Alas, ye little short-sighted critics, could Johnson be envious of the talents of any of his contemporaries? That his opinion on this subject was what in private and in public he uniformly expressed, regardless of what others might think, we may wonder, and perhaps regret. But it is shallow and unjust to charge him with expressing what he did not think. Finding him in a placid humor, and wishing to avail myself of the opportunity which I fortunately had of consulting a sage, to hear whose wisdom I conceived in the ardor of youthful imagination, that men filled with noble enthusiasm for intellectual improvement would gladly have resorted from distant lands. I opened my mind to him ingeniously, and gave him a little stretch of my life, to which he was pleased to listen with great attention. I acknowledge that though educated very strictly in the principle of religion, I had for some time been misled into a certain degree of infidelity, and that I was come now to a better way of thinking, and was fully satisfied of the truth of the Christian revelation, though I was not clear as to every point considered to be orthodox. Being at all times a curious examiner of the human mind, and pleased with an undistinguished display of what has passed in it, he called to me with a warmth, "Give me your hand. I have taken a liking to you." Ooh, are they going to kiss now? He then began to descend upon the force of testimony, and the little we would know of final causes, so that the objections of why was it so, or why was it not so, ought not to disturb us, adding that he himself had at one period been guilty of a temporary neglect of religion, but that it was not the result of argument, but mere absence of thought. After having given credit to reports of his bigotry, I was agreeably surprised when he expressed the following very liberal sentiment, which has the additional value of obviating an objection to our holy religion, founded upon the discordant tenets of Christians themselves. Quote, "For my part, sir, I think all Christians, whether Papists or Protestants, agree in the essential articles, and that their differences are trivial and rather political than religious." Well, that's pretty forward thinking for 1763. Anyway, that's it for now. That's getting good. You know, it's getting more... I guess the rest was just prologue, preamble, until when Boswell met Johnson. No. And there's less footnotes, too, but the last one did kind of trip me up a little bit. And it was kind of a waste of time. Anyway, till next time, bye from Boswell.